Hey, I'm Di McQueen, licensed clinical social worker, family and addiction expert. I'm here with Dr. Brian Jackson, my longtime cohort who specializes in the field of addiction. Welcome to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction.
Di and I have worked with addicts, alcoholics, and their families for over 30 years combined. Our podcast and coaching programs focus on families who have a loved one suffering from addiction. Our experience has been that this disease affects families as much, if not more, than the addict or alcoholic.
Is your world spinning out of control? Are you codependent? Are you experiencing worry, loss of sleep, and difficulty concentrating? If so, you're in the right place. Brian and I have both personally lived it, learned it, and now we're going to teach you tools and techniques on how to get your life back that you thought was shattered by addiction.
Okay, let's dive in.
Brian and I are so excited to introduce to you our new sponsor, Lakeview Health. They are a wonderful residential treatment center. Whether it's the family member who is looking for a place or the addict or alcoholic themselves, this would be the place that we would refer them to. Brian, you have many years of experience with Lakeview.
Yeah, Lakeview Health is a center of excellent addiction treatment. They take an evidence-based approach, medical approach to treating this complex brain disease. They hold the Joint Commission's Golden Seal, and they were voted one of America's best treatment centers by Newsweek magazine. They deliver dual diagnosis, gender-responsive, and trauma-informed care at their gorgeous facility here in Jacksonville, Florida. But they do see people from all over the world do come here to Jacksonville to go to treatment at Lakeview. Their levels of care include medically supervised detox, which a lot of people do need. Then they stabilize them in a residential rehabilitation and partial hospitalization program. They have board-certified physicians, master-level therapists, and they work to address the unique needs of each patient. So in other words, it's not a cookie-cutter program. They help individuals build skills for long-term sobriety. So if you or someone you know needs treatment, please visit their site at lakeviewhealth.com. We also have a hyperlink on our website at familyandaddictionexperts.com where you can just click and get some information about Lakeview Health. And Di, I think you have a number for people to call if they would like to inquire about treatment.
I sure do. That number is 888-480-3799. That's 888-480-3799. Give them a call. Hey everybody, this is Di McQueen, and I'm back to do another podcast today with a good friend and a client, Miss Eileen. And I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute, but we are healing families shattered by addiction. Eileen and I, knew each other from years ago and happened to run into each other in a parking lot a couple years ago now, right? And she was kind of in some dire straits, and we just started talking. And so I'm going to go ahead and let Eileen sort of tell her story, but it's a story of hope. So, nice to see you again. And thank you so much for joining the podcast today. We really appreciate it. And I'd like you to just kind of tell your version and, what was going on and how this kind of helped you, etc.
Sure. I mean, I was in such a dark place. When I ran into you in the grocery store parking lot, I truly did not know what to do next. Our daughter was struggling with alcoholism, and it was so difficult for me to realize that I can't solve the problem. I figured if I just love her enough, I try hard enough, and I keep reading the right blogs and all, that I'm going to somehow come up with a plan that's going to work. But we were clearly failing, and I was struggling. I had hit a wall. And so when I started, I was like, oh, there's a lighthouse here. I need someone to first of all, to just be really honest with me about my role as a family member and what am I responsible for? Because at this point, being a fixer by personality, I figured I was responsible for everything. And that causes a huge problem in the family. And I needed to sit down, and you had sent me a piece on boundaries. And it was mostly me being very real with about how someone's really poor behavior was controlling me. And I had never looked at her addiction in that light at all. Okay, ever. I was looking at how am I going to fix you? Period. There's this other entity, like this other island, and I'm going to, civilize you somehow. But that wasn't the issue at all. Because I was carrying at that point so much resentment, so much anger, and more than anything, fear. And
Absolutely.
so as a family member, you're going through all this stuff. It's like you are caught in a hurricane, and and you're not even giving yourself 5 minutes to step back and say, okay, I'm sad. I'm so sad. I'm so angry. But those emotions were not helping me to manage myself. And they certainly weren't helping me, to manage my daughter. So
Exactly. And I think that something you just said was so interesting because you don't realize how far down the hole you've gone. Like that, I'm not doing any self care. I'm not handling this situation well anymore. My emotions are all over the map, but I don't even know how to identify, and how like you're just kind of like in a haze.
you are. And until, whatever your role in the family is, until you sit down and look at yourself and do the work that we did together, which was me just figuring out what am I angry about? Because if I don't recognize it and understand it, I lead with anger. And if I don't recognize and understand what I'm resenting, I can't be present. So once I could say, okay, it's legitimate to be angry about these things. I'm not Superwoman. No one is. But then turning and saying, what is my role? What can I bring to the table? And just because honestly, when you're in a crisis, and I will share, we were in a deep crisis at that point. We did not know if she would survive. That's how bad things were. And it is impossible for family members to know what to do. And I think at that point, I was calling you and texting you every single day between sessions because I needed a guidepost.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing, when we're at a loss, and I mean, I hope it's okay, but we're in healing professions. So we by nature go like, I can do this. I know how to do this. And in fact, sometimes it actually works against us. And,
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
perspective, which is okay, we use a system called PI, problem, intervention, evaluation. But that's all other directed. That's all about her. I was forgetting about me. There wasn't much me left. So as a result, I wasn't bringing, I'll say I was not bringing anything to the table. And I don't want to let every family member know this. The late night scrolling on the internet about the next possible rehab, that it's going to be this nirvana or something that's going to be a cure-all. Don't invest too much time in that, because you're not doing anything for yourself. You think you are. Also, I would say one of the most significant pieces that I learned during our work together was worrying is not helping. And when I would sit and worry and say, but I'm so worried, I'm so worried, that's not effective. And I felt guilty about doing self-care. And you gave me permission. And it was crazy, but you become like a child when you're in a crisis.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and I need permission to take some time out.
Exactly. And I think the other part of that is, somewhere in there, we think we have some perceived control, right? I mean, like if I worry a little more, I'm actually going to control the outcome of this situation. And in fact, that is so far from the truth, right? The more we actually let go of the reins and sort of let them take responsibility for whatever it is that they're doing, and understanding that I only have so much that I can do to be helpful, and having to learn what that looks like. I mean, I remember that's the back and forth that we did, which is what are you willing to do, and where are your lines of demarcation? Where do you need to stop? Where does, she start and you stop, etc. And that I think is really hard for people because we are such in a fog and so clouded with, I am somehow responsible for this situation. And by the way, she isn't even, this is not a teenager. It's a little harder with teenagers, but even still, same thing. But this is a grown woman, right?
Yeah, and
So
that's
yeah.
how much control do I have over a grown-up? The bottom line is, and the hardest lesson for me to learn, like I could hear it intellectually, you cannot control someone else's addiction. I heard it, chapter, book, and verse in my head. I did not feel it in my heart. I thought because I know how to fix things, a very, completely ego driven, but driven with love, I'm going to fix you. And once, again, being part of Al-Anon as well, gave me the strength to understand, no, you don't control a disease and you don't control another adult. And I want to get back to this point too about the crisis. Um, it's everyone's worst nightmare, but unless you have professional guidance telling you you have to let the crisis happen, you don't, you're not helping the person. We were doing all these rescue missions, but they weren't successful. She needed to go on the journey herself. And finally, when we were able to step back and say we have no control, and she went to a very dark place, but that's when everything turned around.
It is, and unfortunately or fortunately, the story doesn't always end as favorably as it did in your case, which was wonderful. But it really does bode to the fact that, unfortunately, and I mean, my speech, I am a soft landing kind of person. Like, I don't go like, okay, we have to get to the darkest place possible, if it is possible to stop there. But sometimes, unfortunately, you have to save yourself. And so sometimes it means I have to finally cut and run. And in this particular case, it worked out. When you sort of step back and allowed the crisis to happen, it was very scary for all of us, truly. But it did work out, and it's working out beautifully today.
It is. And that was the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life.
Yeah.
I really needed every bit of support from you, from the Al-Anon folks who really become like a family.
Yeah.
Because we're all swimming in this huge hurricane. And as someone once said at a meeting, trying to control someone else's sobriety is like trying to stop the ocean. And little by little, when you're, getting professional counseling, when you're going to Al-Anon, I was doing a lot of journaling at the time because I needed to figure out, again, where am I in the process? What am I responsible for? I had to get rid of that hyper responsibility thing because it was not helping her, and it was just destroying me. And
You nailed it. Destroying you. It was. I mean, you were just a shell when I had talked to you. I mean, you were just literally,
no,
you were so broken yourself, going like, there's nothing else for me to do. And I'm like, there's not. You've got to let go of these reins. You have to, or it's going to kill you both.
yeah, and I don't think that it's possible to do that without someone telling you to do that.
Yep.
I like to think, wow, I'd read all these books on addiction and blogs and podcasts and everything else. But they're not asking you to look at your own truth as a family member. They're not asking the questions. They're not focusing on you. Yeah, and it was a really hard lesson for me to learn to do self-care, because I did not grow up with that model. It was, you should sacrifice and you should suffer, and then people will have a happy ending. Well, with addiction and alcoholism, it's not like that. If you're a family member, the extra suffering is not helping them. All it does is make.
Yeah, I mean, that is the truth, right? And this is where I think it's so important for people to hear stories like yours, because people don't understand that addiction is a family disease, right? It touches so many things. And I have to like reiterate this to my addict and alcoholic patients all the time, that like, you don't think this hurt anybody else. You don't think it affects anybody else, but everybody involved in your circle is deeply, deeply affected. And so it touches all these, there's tentacles for this thing, and it grows, and, in droves, and more people can be affected if we allow it to, and that's really where I go. The line stops here. So tell me one of the most beneficial things you learned for yourself as you kind of went through your journey and went like, okay, you know what? I'm doing what the professionals are telling me to do. Even though it's very, very uncomfortable, at least my own experience was like, I'm hearing you, but this feels like it's so against the grain of what I know. But I tried and did it as well. And obviously, different outcomes for different people. My story wasn't quite as, the rose colored glasses didn't work out quite so beautifully, but I still survived. And that's what I think I learned from me was no matter what happens, I need to take care of myself first. And it's not selfish.
Yeah. And I would say that the hardest lesson that I learned during the journey, and I do feel like I have traveled to outer space and come back because living in addiction land is living on a different planet. I
Yep.
hadn't lived on, didn't know how to breathe the oxygen on it. But what I learned, and what the most important part for me was boundaries. I needed to, I did this, I had this big yellow pad, and I would write it down before I went to bed. On one side, what am I responsible for? On the other side, what am I not responsible for? And then, 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up because you're depressed and scared. And what I would do is just look at the list again and say, okay, Eileen, you're doing everything that you're responsible for. So could you just let that be enough? Can you just, as Paul McCartney says, can you just let it be? That's
And it
very
that
hard.
it's hard. I mean, in theory, it sounds, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. In real life, in real time, when you see a family member struggling as badly as yours was, it is
Oh,
not an easy thing to do. But you can, and you did it. And that's what was so exciting to see the changes. And ultimately, it gets them sometimes desperate enough to realize, oh crud, I really am out here dangling and they're not going to save me this time.
yeah. I mean, I have so many. I have a white car, and I called it my, my white knight, my white horse. And I wanted to get on the white horse and ride out and save her, especially when we were at the dark part. I was like, we got to go there. We have to get her. We have to bring her back. But we had done that before and it didn't work.
Right.
Then we did it. Guess what? Didn't work. So I needed to, number one, make room that this could have a very bad ending. And there was a piece of me that just was like, I will not let that happen. I cannot let that happen. But again, with boundaries, you do that little list. I'm not responsible for the outcome. She's an adult. It's her life. She's choosing certain things. Yeah, it's a bad disease, and I will do anything I can to help, but draw the line. And I hadn't drawn lines. I got depleted, and then I was useless.
Right.
Then changed around. Okay, Eileen, start doing the self-care. Start getting boundaries. Start being honest about what you're angry about. And when I did that, there was an energy shift.
It is. It goes from fear to strength, right? I can do this. And the thing about boundaries that's so important that I think a lot of people miss the boat on is boundaries are not necessarily fluid, especially while someone is in their deepest addictive state, right? It's important that when you draw the line, that your boundaries are loving and kind, consistent in how you present, and you don't back down no matter what. And that's
Yeah.
what, when people are trying to establish, I always say to them, hey, make sure it's something you can live with because once you present, you cannot turn around. You've got to keep this line. Now, later on, if someone gets better, you can, decide if you're going to make some fluidness to those boundaries. But at the time, especially when things were really, really desperate, my message to you over and over again was the boundary must be consistently, this, whatever it is that you choose to do with it, you guys have to be together. The family has to be together. And we have to say the same message over and over and over again. Even if you want to crawl in a hole and cry and do whatever afterwards, at the time that you're presenting, it needs to be strong, meaningful, loving, and kind, but they know you mean business. And that was not an easy thing to do.
No, no, I honestly have to say, I don't know exactly how I got through it because my heart was in my throat all the time. And, there were just so many sleepless nights and the worry, the fear, all the emotions, but drilling it back down to I'm allowed to have the emotions, but I've drawn this line where I'm not doing a search and rescue mission because it's not going to succeed. But it was really hard to sit on my hands at that time and not get in the car and go get her and bring her back. And, again, and you've told me this and other people have, it's you cannot love someone into sobriety. You know, I,
No, but you can love someone into death. You can. That is absolutely the truth.
but I tend to intellectualize things to death, but I just didn't want it to be my own.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
when I
Not on
realized,
my street. Yeah.
yeah, friends were coming up to me and saying, whatever you need to do, go do, but you've got to pull yourself back from the ledge because you're on a ledge. I was on a ledge trying to pull someone out of a ditch. Well, that's not a very good way to do a search and rescue.
No.
Operate from a position of strength. And yeah, that was operate from a position of strength. Stay really clear about what you're responsible for, and keep the perspective of you can't save them unless they want to be saved. You can't. You can
No.
be, I could, hey, when you're ready, here are some rehabs. But it wasn't the case of me going in and like, orchestrating everything and getting everything lined up and getting her and putting her in the car and taking her again. No, it had already proven to fail.
Yes, several times, right? So we go like, okay, this time around it worked out beautifully. And I think that's the other part of this. Once you get to a certain place, at least my experience with this is I've never rolled backwards. You know what I mean? Like I don't look at addiction the same way that I did all those years ago when I was living in that absolute, it wasn't even just fear for me, it was terror. Terror. Like I was terrified. And I kept thinking this is gonna be my fault. I didn't do enough. What did I miss? How could I do this a different way? What else do I need to do? And all the begging and all the pleading and all those things, like it just went on, deaf ears. As a matter of fact, it usually was my fault. You know what I mean? Like it's you, it's because of you. If you would stop asking me questions, or if you would stop trying to, interject whatever you were doing, and I would be like, wait a minute, I'm the one trying to help you. Like, what's going on here? And when I realized I do need to step back, I've never gone back to that place of feeling like I don't have any power or control anymore. Because the person I have power and control over is me. And I was like, oh, I don't ever have to feel that way again. And to this many years, many, many, many years for me now, I don't feel that way anymore. I go like I know what to do, I know how to help. The best way I know how, which is stepping the heck out of the way. Um, and really just giving support where I know. So when you think about like how this rolled out, and thank God she did finally reach back out to me. I would, kind of just roll the dice every couple of days, going like, "Hey, out there, how you doing out there?" And finally, one day she reached back, and we're like, it was so cool. But knowing that it couldn't be a family member because sometimes it's just too close for comfort. And now that you have seen, some great things that she's doing, and yes, it's a process. But how do you think that the best things like would have happened to you based on this whole turnaround? Like what was good about it for you? What have you learned? What are you continuing to do to be supportive, etc.?
Well, first of all, she's amazing. And that had nothing to do with me. That was her coming from the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. And now, surpassing anything I could have imagined as far as sobriety and a peaceful, meaningful life, which is what she has now. Um, what have I learned? Again, it's remain positive, me as a parent, and it's the hardest thing because your mind always goes to the fear factor as a parent, just the dark things. um, make room that I don't, that how I learned humility. Okay. When you're dealing with an addiction crisis, have some humility. You only have a certain role in it. You're not, I'm not producing the whole show. I am an actor on the stage. Okay. That's my part. And, I did even one time at 3 o'clock in the morning, I kind of wake up and go, oh my God, I'm not the producer. I'm not the director. I'm just this person, Eileen, who is in this addictive cycle with someone I love very much. And then, because we had done the work together, going back to, okay, what can I do for her? Well, I can be a lighthouse. I can just shine the light. I can point in the directions, but I was trying to be a lighthouse that jumped into the water and actually moved the boat itself, which, was painful for me and likely even more painful for her, and certainly a failure. Um, it's humility, because as family members, you're so emotional, you can't think straight, number one, even though you think you're thinking straight, you're not. um all your adrenaline and cortisol and everything all revved up, and it's impossible for you to think rationally and calmly. So the last person that I thought about was myself, and
Exactly.
that affects everything else. How is this affecting my marriage? Okay, we're a nation of two, my husband and I. And if I give everything to her, what's left there? Am I going about destroying that as well? No, no, no. My anger and worry and fear and sadness um, doesn't need to affect a relationship that's healthy. I have to keep that relationship healthy. And that's another part of self-care is, yes, the addict is one person in your life, but what about everybody else? Are you nurturing those relationships? Are you even showing up?
Yeah, and we're so checked out. I mean, it's really hard. I can remember like, going through weeks, going like, now I know I went to work. I just don't remember exactly what I did today, stuff like that, where I was so checked out. I was so non-present for my own life. And what I found was it was disturbing to me that I had given away so much of me for something I had zero, like I thought I really had some locus of control. And what a wake up call for me to go like, uh, you have so little part in this, but you think you're so huge amount, of this thing that if you just could do this one more thing, they'll get it. And that was such an eye opener to me to go like, you know what? You really have become the focus of this whole thing when in fact you are a minor detail. Bring it back, bring it on back and get back in your body and try to figure out what you need, what's going on for you, and step back into your life. Because I missed a lot of it for a long time. And it was crazy when I went back on it. I was like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing?
And back to what did I learn? What I learned is, don't as a family member, don't think you're helping when you lose yourself and you sacrifice yourself and proverbial nail yourself to the cross. It's not going to help them. um I had no idea that that was a reality, none. Now what I've learned is, if this happens again with anybody in my life, to show up as a loving, supportive person, but to be very, very clear about when I'm being destroyed, when I'm just carrying too much. I mean, the weight on my back of this, the emotional toll. I felt like I aged 10 years.
Yeah.
But did I have 10 years? No. But I didn't have the skill set to say, step back, take care of yourself,
Yeah.
take I don't think families think about that message at all. I know I didn't, and neither did my husband. We weren't thinking about take care of ourselves at
No,
all.
no. And I think it's when you have to land on your knees before you recognize, what, I am in so much pain. And that was the part that really blew my mind. Is like, how did I get here? It was insidious for me. All of a sudden, I mean, literally on my knees begging for someone to like help me. How do I get out of this mess I'm in? And it wasn't
Yeah.
even my mess. It wasn't even my mess. At that time, I was like, what is happening here? I was just like a noodle, a wet
I,
noodle.
I I used to say the only thing that I want and the only thing, and I'd pay any price for it, is peace of mind.
Yep.
And give it to you. You can only give it to yourself. And I was talking to somebody at work, and she said, "Don't let anybody steal your peace." I said, "Well, that's easy to say, but you're not in the situation I'm in. So could you give yourself 5 minutes apiece?" And it started with 5 minutes because that's all
Right.
I could handle. And worry script. I go back to my fear script. I go back to my sadness
Right.
and and projection all the time. What will the future hold? If I do this, what will the outcome be? I never was even looking through the lens of, what does she need to just go and try and be the best person she can, and that obviously includes being sober. She needed space, and I was, like anybody, I didn't want to give it. I didn't want to give it.
Right. Right.
Mother,
Well, say that one more time.
mothering is not mothering.
Mothering is not mothering. I love that, which is true. Smothering is not mothering. Yes, for sure. It is the hardest thing to do, and that's what we do a lot of times. And like I said, when I look back, I go, I can't even believe that was me because I'm so different today. But I had to learn tools, and I had to learn techniques, and I had to use what was given to me. And ultimately, it got me in this field, right? Which was really interesting to me because that was not a mindset. But I started to realize that there's so many people that have no clue, and they go to sheer panic rather than what can I do? What do I have control over? How can I best help? And what do they need? We don't even ask what they need. We just tell them what they need, right? So,
Yes. I'm going to go back to that day when I saw you in the supermarket parking lot. It was truly like I thought, oh, the heavens have opened up because here is my guide. Here is my shepherd for the journey because I'm going to crash. That's it. I'm going to crash. Um, and the greatest thing about getting help for a family member is, um, you feel some sense of peace, that sense of peace that you are so desperately looking for, or that I was so desperately looking for, because getting professional help made me realize that, I'm just a human being, and it's okay to forgive myself for not being able to solve this incredibly huge problem. And
yes,
in retro,
yeah.
yeah,
Sure. And then the other thing for me was, I don't know if you felt this way, but for me, I really felt this way, which was it was the first time in a very long time that I was like, there is potential hope here. There really is potential hope here. And in this story, what a beautiful ending, a day at a time. A day at a time. There is so many wonderful things going on in your life, in her life, and it's just amazing. It's a great story. It really is. So it always goes like, and she was one of those, we were like, not sure how this story's going to end, but I know how the story can end for you. And that's the
yeah,
hardest part, as a clinician or a coach, to tell someone, I am not sure how the story is going to end, and it breaks my heart to tell you this, but you got to save you. And that may mean it will help save her. It's her only hope that we have, but at the same time, we may go the other direction as well. And that is really hard to go, like, we better prepare,
yeah.
right?
Oh, and again, I could not have done that without you standing there saying it is okay for you to do this. I could not give myself permission. I was refusing to accept it. And again, it was a boundary thing. I did not know where I started and she ended, and it was all together. And I was still stuck on this. Well, I've read this and I've read that, and something will happen under my control.
Right.
And just I should say losing control, letting go of control, letting,
Exactly. So, best gift for you? through this process because, for me, it was learning like, oh my gosh, a whole new way of life. And I'm actually grateful, even though I'm an addict myself, it's different when it's not you and you all of a sudden you go like into this tailspin. And I go, when it was me, I go like, okay, my stuff, my fault, my whatever, right? But when it was my other people, my loved ones, I'm like, oh my God. And I thought, oh, I went into the tailspin of my life. So I was like, okay, this is really important. But what I was grateful for at the end of it was thank God for them because, man, I learned a lot through that process and still do every single day. Right. Because,
I have learned so much. And even though you're basically it's like going through a war, but when you make it through, you say, "Wow, it was the hardest thing I ever did, but you know what? It was the best thing I ever did." I feel so much more grounded and peaceful as a human. And again, that was my goal. I just wanted to be peaceful again. And now I can truly look at that saying, "Don't let anyone rob your peace." And I'm able to identify with it much more. Whereas before, I did not have the strength to. I was a fickle lamb. Somebody just beat me, whip me. I'll take it as long as the outcome's good. No, I real so the greatest gift. We're I think our whole family relationship is better.
isn't that awesome? I
It
mean,
is.
yeah,
There are no ties that are going to break you.
exactly. That's a choice, right? Like if you're going to give it away, that's on you at this time. Now you know that. And you go like, I can live my life in the present moment. We don't know what the future holds, but today everything is awesome. And I go,
Yeah.
how about that?
How about that? When you again, it's like when you can make it through that and look back. Yeah, no, I am definitely a more highly evolved person. And the other thing is you can help others. If somebody's at work and I mean, this addiction is everywhere. Alcoholism's everywhere.
Yep.
And maybe a little bit of light on that. And that's, that makes me feel, a little more validation that the suffering was awful, but I came through it and I learned, and now I can just be this lighthouse.
Yep. And you are a beautiful lighthouse. So I want to thank you for kind of sharing your story with me today. It means a lot because I know that there's someone out there that can go like, oh my gosh, I totally, totally resonate with the fact that my child, my brother, my sister, my husband, my wife, parent, whatever, is struggling, and I can only do so much for them, but I definitely need to save me. So
Yeah.
Eileen, it's so great to see you always. It's a pleasure to do this with you today. And I really appreciate you sharing, a really hard situation with the world, to maybe give some hope for some person out there that doesn't feel they have any right now.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for being my lighthouse.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know what? We just keep treading through it and together we can. And I really believe that. This is Healing Families Shattered by Addiction, and we have a beautiful website you can go to. There's some free resources on there. Come join us for a half-hour consult for free if you need to talk and see if there's something we can do to be helpful, or we can guide you in the right direction. There's podcasts, there's all kinds of other information out there, and we'll keep trudging through this together. So thanks so much for joining
Welcome.
me today. Thanks so much for joining our podcast, Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. We'll be back in a couple weeks with more important tools, techniques, and ways for you to focus on you instead of the alcoholic or addict in your world.
Until then, please go to our website, familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's familyandaddictionexperts.com. You'll also see links to our Facebook and Instagram pages. Please also, if you have any emails that you would like to send us, that's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. With any thoughts, feelings, questions that you may have for us, we would love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.